Okay, so last week, if you remember, we talked a lot about things like eyes. We talked about being sober minded, fasting from the world, observing the Sabbath. We also talked a little bit about the Trinity and what that meant to us. Okay. This week, we are going to stay kind of along the same lines, but I feel like this is it's almost like Christ was telling them, okay, this is how you are supposed to live. But now this week, it's like, now this is what you can expect from others. Not necessarily in a good way, but living this way, you'll probably expect some of these things to occur. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and read the entire thing from 31 to 34. Then we'll come back to 31 and we'll go through the scripture as necessary. Okay. Jesus said, "No prophet is welcome on his home turf. Doctors don't cure those who know them." Jesus said, "A city built on a high hill and fortified cannot fall, nor can it be hidden." Jesus said, "What you will hear in your ear, in the other ear proclaim from your rooftops. After all, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, nor does one put it in a hidden place. Rather, one puts it on a lampstand so that all who come and go will see its light." Jesus said, "If a blind person leads a blind person, both of them will fall into a hole." And I noticed that there is a typo here in the text online. I can assure you that it does not say the same thing in the Nag Hammadi, the physical text that I have, and it does not say that in the complete Gospels either. So it is the blind leading the blind. Okay. All right. So for verse 31, this translation says, "A prophet is not acceptable in the prophet's own town. A doctor does not heal those who know the doctor." So initially, when I first read this many years ago, it was kind of like, okay, so if I go to people that I know with these teachings that I'm learning within these texts, they're not going to be willing to accept it, right? And I want you to kind of think about that in relation to something that Katie, you specifically had said about one of your family members not really being willing to listen to you. It's because they know you. I have that happen quite often in my family. They're like, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever." They don't really listen. And to be honest, I'm not really sure why, because I feel like generally speaking, I go to my parents and I may not take all of their advice, but I do listen to a lot of what they have to say. And sometimes I do take their advice if I feel like it is applicable to my own situation. They're coming from their own perspective, but I feel like our family, especially, and people that we grew up with, they don't really see us in the same light as they would someone outside of their bubble, because for some reason people within our bubble don't have as much authority, I guess, in most people's eyes. We actually see this concept several times throughout Christ's teachings in the New Testament. So we're going to start in Matthew 13. And welcome to whoever just arrived. Don't see who it is, but okay, welcome to you. Okay, so in Matthew 13, verses 57 and 58, I'm actually going to read from 53 to 58. Just for the sake of context. Matthew 13:53. "And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed thence. And when he was come into his own country, he taught them in their synagogue insomuch that they were astonished and said, "Whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph, I assume, and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man all these things?" And they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, "A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief." So this is a really interesting concept. The idea that, first of all, Jesus was very keenly aware of the fact that people didn't really honor or respect him in his own hometown. But then he goes on to say that he didn't even do any miracles because of their unbelief. And that has to at least bring a little something to mind in terms of belief. It makes me think of the placebo effect. If you tell someone who has been diagnosed with cancer, if they have so many months to live, that is kind of embedded into their psyche, and they are almost anticipating that day, right? But if you tell them that they have a potential for healing and that they could have, considerable longevity despite their circumstances, then they're more likely to live longer. We've seen how belief is so important. Dr. Bruce Lipton really illustrates this point very well, especially scientifically, in his book, The Biology of Belief. So was he not doing any miracles in his hometown? Was he just not bothering? Was he just not wasting his time? Or did those miracles not occur because the people didn't believe? Remember, if you remember, Christ talks about how if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, right? He says that you'll be able to tell this mountain to get up and move, and it will cast itself into the ocean. And that is in Matthew 17. I'm going to pull that up for you now. Just a second. I have all these other scriptures pulled up, but you know how I am. I end up getting other things that come into my mind. So I'm just going to roll with it. All right. Here we go. Yeah, our beliefs and our thoughts are really incredibly important. So, and here it says, and this is Matthew 17, verse 20. And Jesus said unto them, "Because of your unbelief, for verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." So this verse happens several times in the Gospels. Okay, so there's at one point where it's like it'll cast itself into the ocean for you. So next scripture I want to look at is Mark 6. And this is when Christ is teaching at Nazareth. So he's back in his hometown, right? He's known as the Nazarene, Jesus of Nazareth. I'm going to start in Mark 6:1 and read through to verse 6. And he went out from thence and came into his own country, and his disciples follow him. And when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, "From whence hath this man these things? And what wisdom is this which is given unto him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and of Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they were offended at him. But Jesus said unto them, "A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief, and he went round about the villages teaching." So you'll notice there's this considerable variation here from this one in Matthew. This one in Matthew was a bit shorter, more concise, whereas Mark gives us a little bit more detail. Now, was he embellishing or was he giving a different perspective? We don't really know, but if you remember correctly, one scripture is translated or copied from another, and that's why we have the synoptic gospels, or the similar story between 3 out of the 4 gospels, is because 2 of them were copied from one of them. Okay, now that said, I think it's important to at least look at some of the additions, right? So first, in Matthew, it says he did not many mighty works. So he didn't do any mighty works. He didn't do any miracles. But then in Mark, it says he could not. He could there do no mighty work. I know, fancy words, but he couldn't do it there. So that to me is kind of significant, right? Now it said, now remember in Matthew, it said he didn't because of their unbelief. This one says he couldn't, except for he laid some hands on some sick people and healed them. But then he marveled because of their unbelief. So slightly different variation there, but still worth noting, right? So let's look at the same story then in Luke 4. Okay, and this is under the heading Jesus' public ministry. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go back through. They're saying all of the same thing, not quite in the same detail. Okay, but is this not Joseph's son? Okay, we'll start there. And he said unto them, ye will surely say unto me this proverb, Physician, heal thyself. Whatsoever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in thy country. And he said, verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. Okay, so several times he makes clear that going to the people that you are most familiar with is probably going to be one of the hardest ministries that you have. Okay, trying to speak truth into other people's lives, whether it is spiritual truth, whether it is physical truth, oh, hey, maybe you shouldn't eat this or eat that, or maybe you shouldn't get pokey jokies, or, various things, where I'm going with that. People that are going to be much less likely to listen to you. And I know that that's really frustrating, but so then what do? We go tell everybody else and let them figure it out on their own. It's that idea of planting the seed. You plant the seed and that's fine. They may not listen to you. They may not hear you or believe what you have to say, but someone else will probably come along and water that seed. So it's okay. It's okay that you planted that seed. Case in point, I told my family about essential oils for years. They thought I was a nutso. Then they started using essential oils. Now they use the same brand that I use. Took them a long time, a couple of years, but they came around, and it wasn't of my doing. I didn't keep beating them over the head with it. I did a little bit in the beginning, but they were very resistant to it. But now they're like, oh yeah, we love these things. We swear by them. So had to plant the seed, but I wasn't the one to water it, and I wasn't the one to cultivate it. Okay. Yes, planting the seeds. All right. So again, I know I have 2 of you in here. I'm sorry. I see iPhone. I don't see who it is, but if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, or raise your hand and let me know, and I will open up the mic to you. Okay. There she is. Hi. Sorry, it just says iPhone. I wasn't sure who it was.
Sometimes it's better reception when I don't have the video on. Sometimes I go in my house and it goes away because I live near the water.
Gotcha.
So anyways, it's me. Sorry,
totally fine. You're good. You're good. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you guys.
Okay, so we're under the heading of the Samaritans. We're going to be in John 4:44. I'm going to read back from 4:39. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman, which testified, "He told me all that ever I did." So when the Samaritans were come unto him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. So before I go forward, this is after he's spoken to the woman at the well. Okay, he told her what was going on in her life, and she was like, "Oh, wow, let me follow you," right? um, so now we see that they kind of want him to hang out for a little while. And many more believed because of his own word, and said unto the woman, "Now we believe, not because of thy saying, for we have heard him ourselves, and know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world." Now, after 2 days, he departed thence and went into Galilee. For Jesus himself testified that a prophet hath no honor in his own country. Okay, so this is another indication. Now, in this instance, it wasn't Christ's story, it was the woman at the well. The people had heard her story and didn't believe her. They had to see it for themselves. So that really illustrates this point that, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can tell someone, "Hey, this is not good for you." And they're not really going to heed your advice until they get the chance to see it for themselves. Unfortunately, usually that comes with consequences, especially as we have seen with the current events over the last few years. We can see how a lot of people chose to do things out of rash, hasty decisions, from a sense of fear, and we're not willing to listen to reason, to people who, even those who had worked in the profession and were actually doing the testing or were seeing the patients that were dealing with the consequences of these actions. They still were not willing to listen. And now many of them have had to endure the hardship of either losing their own health or losing a loved one because of the choice that they made hastily, right? So unfortunately, we will have to see some of our loved ones suffer because of their decisions. The best we can do is plant the seed and hope that someone else comes and waters it, pray that someone else comes and waters it. But ultimately, it's not really up to us. There comes a point where it's personal responsibility, right? So keep that in mind when you have people kind of bucking against all that you're telling them. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to verse 32. Do you guys have any questions? All right. Continuing on. So now Jesus is talking about a city built on a hill, on a high hill, and fortified, cannot fall, nor can it be hidden. Okay. There is a book out called The Sayings of Jesus. And it says, "A city built upon the top of a high mountain and established can neither fall nor be hidden." So very similar to that. Let's look at Matthew 5:14. "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid." Okay, we can even go further down. "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light unto all that are in the house." Okay. Matthew 7:24-25. Let me just make sure that I have this right here. I'm working from two different books. I want to make sure that I don't. Okay. Yeah. 7:24-25. "Therefore, whosoever heareth these things of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock." Okay, so you have some slightly different concepts going on here. One is kind of hard to hide a city on a hill, right? Especially one that's well lit. Also, it's not going to fall if it's fortified well, if it's got a solid foundation. So this is kind of a multi-prong thing here. I also wonder if this idea of a high hilltop or a high mountaintop has some sort of significance for a level of consciousness, right? If you are living from a place of wholeness and oneness, the what everyone's calling nowadays, these 5D consciousness or this Christed consciousness, then you probably are pretty well fortified. You probably are pretty bright. It brings to mind an image similar to this. Give me a second. Right? All these images of Christ with a halo, or Christ with these projections coming out of his head, these beams of light. Sometimes these are spoken of in scripture as horns. So him having horns coming out of his head, or even horns coming out of his hands. This is an indication of enlightenment, common symbol of enlightenment. We can see this in a number of other religious figures, right? We have Buddha with a halo as well. Lots of pictures of Buddha with a halo. And then, of course, Krishna with a halo. So we have lots of depictions of this. And one of the things you probably find interesting is if you go to the Holy See. So this is the Catholic, the Vatican website. A second, I'll pull it up. If you look through the pictures of the popes, a lot of them do have this halo. Now, not all of them do, which I find interesting, but a good many of them do. So here is the website for the Vatican, and you'll see Pope Francis does not have a halo. Pope Benedict the 16th does not have a halo. John Paul II, he does. John Paul I does not. Paul VI does. John the 23rd does. So if you look through, there's a number of these, and you can kind of scroll, and you will find several of them, some of which have a halo and some of which do not. Okay. So I found that interesting. Not sure why. Maybe some of them just weren't enlightened. I don't know. But still interesting nonetheless. Okay, so where are we? We're right here. Now, the other thing worth considering, no, I don't know all of their stories, unfortunately. I do know that the one that was closer to our time, I think it was John Paul, he seemed to be a really good pope. I mean, as popes go, I don't know a whole lot about the Catholic Church, and that was many, many, many years ago. I think I was a child or a teenager at that point, but I remember people having a lot of good things to say about him. And whenever I did see him on television, he did seem like kind of a pious man. So, and pious not in the sense of like arrogant, but pious in the sense that he was trying to live out the gospel to the best of his ability. Whereas the Pope that we have now is ratchet. I'm sorry. He's a terrible human. His history in and of itself is disturbing. And then on top of that, just some of the things that he has said since he has been Pope. It's amazing to me that he's Pope, but I see why, because he has certain familial connections. So it's the same as like kings and queens. That's how he got in there. It's really, really disgusting in my opinion, but I digress. That said, let's look at Luke 6. Whosoever cometh to me and heareth my sayings and doeth them, I will shew you to whom he is like. He is like a man which built an house and digged deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon that house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. But he that heareth and doeth not is like a man that without a foundation built an house upon the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Now, I'm sure Jesus wasn't just talking about masonry. I'm sure he was not talking about literally building a house because he prefaces it by saying, if you hear me and you do what I'm telling you to do, this is how you're going to have a strong foundation. But if you hear me and don't do what I'm telling you to do, it's like building your house in the sand, basically. It's just going to be sucked into the sand. It's going to be beaten down by the storm. It's going to be destroyed. Whereas if you build it on a firm foundation, this listening and especially doing of his teachings, then you'll be on solid foundation. Okay, which sets us up really nicely then for verse 33. And let me actually, I think there's one more. Yeah, let's read this first and then we'll 2, 3. Hold on. I want to make sure that I don't miss any. Okay, we're gonna read a few more. All right, so we read Luke. Let's go into Isaiah 2, and we're gonna read verses 2 and 3. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Okay. Micah 4, verses 1 and 2. But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow unto it. And many nations shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So nearly identical, right? Matthew 5:15. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Okay, so we're kind of expounding upon this. So we've already kind of gotten the firm foundation, right? But why do we not hide our light? Because it gives light to everyone who's around. Okay. Luke 11:33. No man, when he hath lighted a candle, putteth it in a secret place, neither under a bushel, but on a candlestick, that they which come in may see the light. Okay, so we've got a lot of scriptures to kind of back that up. Again, Mark 4:21. And he said unto them, is a candle brought to be put under a bushel or under a bed, and not to be set on a candlestick? And then Luke 8:16. No man, when he hath lighted a candle, covereth it with a vessel, or putteth it under a bed, but setteth it on a candlestick, that they which enter in may see the light. Got lots of them, right? Let's see. This one is interesting. So this is from the Q Gospel. Now remember what I said about the Q Gospel. This is a theoretical gospel. There are many references to this gospel, but there are no actual copies of this particular text. Okay. The only time you will find it is in reference in other religious texts. So a lot of people speculate that the three synoptic gospels actually came from the Q, or sometimes the Quell gospel. We are in verse 12. Chapter 12, verses 2 through 3. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered behind closed doors will be proclaimed from the housetops. And then Matthew 10:27. What I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in light, and what ye hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the housetops. Okay, so this is our segue here. All right. Verse 33, what you will hear in your ear, in the other ear, proclaim from your rooftops. Now, it is speculated that this kind of double, what you hear in your ear, in the other ear, proclaim from your rooftops. It seems kind of silly that you would be proclaiming it from your other ear, but many of the scholars actually believe that this could have been an example of dittography, which is like when the scribes were copying the text, they may have accidentally copied a word twice. Okay. The other speculation on this is that the other ear could be in reference to someone else's ear, or even to one's own inner ear. And I like this. I want to sit with this for a minute, because we talked a lot about eyes just a couple of weeks ago, and this singularity of the eye. I want you to think about what you hear on a daily basis. There's always noise going on around, even if no one is talking, even if the world outside is relatively quiet, you can kind of hear the hum of electricity, right? There's some kind of noise almost always going on. You can hear your own breathing. You can hear your partner snoring. You can hear all sorts of things. And it's nearly impossible to have complete and utter silence. Even when you put earplugs in your ear, you can still hear the blood pumping through your ears. So it's just this constant noise. And you can even pick up the Schumann resonance. We are so used to hearing it that we don't even notice it. But there is a low hum that comes from our planet that is audible to our ears. Okay, very low hum. Now, my question to you is, ever hear something without your ears? Think about it for a minute. That inner voice. There's like an inner dialogue going sometimes, or maybe you get a hit of intuition. Maybe you are hearing the voice of God. And I don't mean like projected technologies. I mean literal like communication from spirit. You're hearing, but not with your physical ears. You're hearing with your inner ear. You're hearing with your intuition, right? Yes, that still small voice, exactly. So this could be pretty significant. And to bring us back to something I mentioned earlier, to kind of give this a little bit more significance, is this idea of doing it from the rooftops, right? Because remember what I said about that high mountain being representative of a higher level of consciousness? Maybe he's saying, yeah, sure, shout it from the rooftops, but maybe he's saying this information is kind of going up to the top level for processing. What you're hearing from Christ, are you learning how to apply it? Are you assimilating it into your being? I definitely feel like there's much more meaning to this verse. You know how I feel anyway. I think all of these verses are far more than just, a logical reading of them. I mean, a literal reading of them. Um, Jesus speaks in parables for a reason. So why should we not read the scripture in the same fashion? Why should we not read it in the more allegorical sense so that we can get both that kind of surface level meaning as well as those deeper meanings? So what you will hear in your ear, again, notice he's not saying two ears. He's not saying two ears, right? But he's saying if what you will hear in one ear, then in the other ear, proclaim to your rooftops. Could it be, I'm sorry, from your rooftops? Could it be in one ear and out the other? I don't think so. But that gives an interesting twist to that old idiom, right? In one ear and out the other. I feel like this is definitely your inner hearing. Okay. And then as we've seen several times, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, and nor does one put it in a hidden place. It puts it on a lampstand so that all who come in can see it, right? Okay. Now, let's see. So let's read this again, Matthew 10:27. What I tell you in darkness, that speak ye in light. And what you hear in the ear, that preach ye upon the housetops. Now, this gives a little bit more dimension to it as well. Because what I tell you in darkness. Now, if you are familiar with Christ's ministry, it was very public. Once he went public with it, it was very public. He was out early in the morning doing his teachings. So in the darkness, this is something that is representative of, solitude, isolation, secret, hidden, right? You don't see things in the darkness. But now he's telling his disciples to speak those things in the light. Speak them out in the open. Could even be metaphorical light, like a spiritual light. What he's telling them in their shadow work. They're supposed to be projecting it out. There's a lot of different possibilities for this verse. Preach it on the housetops. I think that means close to what we think it means, shout it from the rooftops, right? But I would feel like I would be remiss in not reminding you that this is involving a higher level of consciousness and awareness, a higher level of modus operandi. We are not functioning so much from a place of physicality. Go tell it on the mountain. Very good. Yes. Over the hills and everywhere, right? And what do we do when we realize these truths? We've seen so many churches spring up all across the world over the span of 2 centuries, 2 millennia. And it's amazing to see the kind of fire that results from faith. I remember what we were talking about just a little bit ago with the faith as small as a mustard seed. Well, how do you think Christ's message spread so dang quickly? It was like wildfire because he was telling them, go share it. Go tell the truth. Now, what does that mean for us today in the 21st century? Are we still preaching the things that people were preaching even just 100 years ago? Are we still preaching those things that Christ was preaching 2,000 years ago? If we look at how the texts were written, which ones were suppressed, the evolution of scripture throughout the last few centuries, especially, but even throughout the whole of that period from Christ's teachings until now, we've seen some pretty radical changes. So what are we shouting from the rooftops? Are we shouting that people can indeed be free? That there's more to this life than just what our physical eyes can see and what our physical ears can hear? That there's more to the meanings in these words than just a literal definition of each of these verses? I think that it's A, naive of us, and B, dangerous to the truth of the message if we only discuss these scriptures from a literal perspective. You will not find me being a literalist here. That is not what I do. Some can be taken literally, sure, but I do believe that there's always a deeper meaning in that. Luke 12:3. Therefore, whatsoever ye have spoken in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which ye have spoken in the ear in closets shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. Secrets. Well, that's interesting, because now that gives a whole new dimension. It brings to mind the old game that what is that called? It was the game where I spin the bottle. I know, probably not appropriate for a scripture conversation, but hear me out. Where they would spin the bottle, and then the two people that the bottle was pointing to or whatever, they would have to go into a closet, and nobody knows what was going on in there, right? But I'm sure that the people outside of that closet had some stories to tell the next day. Oh, so and so and so were in the closet together. They might have never did anything. Not that anyone would ever believe them, right? So that gives you a whole other perspective for the scripture, and I just don't want to miss any of these, little facets of this message. Think about how quickly a rumor will spread. How many times you've said something. My sister the other day shared a piece of important information with me, and she was telling me this story about how she had shared this information with someone else before she was ready to share it with a wider audience. And this person was like, oops, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. So people get a bit of juicy information, a bit of gossip. Guess what? Everybody's gonna know about it. How juicy is this message, though? How juicy is it to be able to tell people you have the ability to heal yourself and others? You have the ability to raise the dead. That's a pretty big thing. A lot of people don't really believe that. Even if they've been told, they don't believe that. Even if they've seen it with their own eyes, sometimes they don't believe that. Right? But Christ even sent his disciples out saying, go heal the sick, go raise the dead. So this is an exciting message. And yet, how many people do you see actually speaking the truth of that message? Sure, you hear people saying, oh, be baptized in the name of Jesus and you'll be saved. Okay. But what about the rest of the message? What about the healing and the raising of the dead? What happened to that? You know, this is a gift that we have been given to share with others. But there's not a whole lot of people shouting that from the rooftops. That's one of the reasons we decided to go public with this. All of these videos are public now on YouTube for this very reason. Because we want people to know the truth that they do have this kind of power within them. They do have this potential for things beyond their wildest imagination. Things for good. I don't think that the same would necessarily apply for those who have evil in their hearts. But then again, you see some pretty awful things going on in the world, and you have to wonder what kind of power they've figured out. All right, let's move on to, this is again from the Q Gospel. And this is chapter 6, verses 39 through 40. He also told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Okay, so now we are down here. If a blind person leads a blind person, both of them will fall into a hole. We see this again. Matthew 15:14. Going to go up a little bit. Then came his disciples and said unto him, knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? This was when he said that it's what comes out of the mouth that defiles a man. But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Luke 6:39. And he spake a parable unto them. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? Well, I think you ladies have a pretty good understanding of what this is. This little idiom is used quite often, the blind leading the blind, in our society. I feel like there's a lot of that going on lately. But if you are without spiritual sight, how can you expect to be of any benefit to anyone else who does not have spiritual sight either? If you are merely looking with your physical eyes, sure, you might be able to see the path, but can you know what's ahead? Right? Can you determine whether or not there's going to be a bend in the path, whether there's going to be a steep incline, whether there's going to be a wolf along the way? No. But now with spiritual sight, you can. If you're tuned in, if you're tapped in, if you're turned on, you can know when something is coming your way that's not beneficial for you, and you can get out of the way. But if you're following someone who has no idea where they're going, it's probably not ideal. Again, even if they're not blind physically, even if they can just see normally with both their eyes, if they don't know where they're going, if they don't have an idea of the terrain, if they don't have a map, why the heck are you following them? Now I ask you, how many leaders do you know that are blind? And I don't mean physically. How many in our executive and legislative branches are blind? How many in our pulpits are blind? How many in our education system are blind? We see what happens to those who choose to follow them. If they're blind too, they fall into a ditch. And think about it. Yeah, too many to count. Exactly. Think about it for a second. Let's take the education system as an example, or healthcare system, or the governments, or the banking system, pretty much anything at this point, any of these major systems that we see collapsing in before our eyes. Think about how many people have walked into the lion's den by following some of these institutions, right? Again, let's take the events of the last couple of years and how a certain remedy was pushed for this terrible, awful, horrible thing that no one wanted, right? And how many of those people were led into absolute disaster and travesty because of it? How many of them lost their lives? How many of them lost their family? If everyone jumped off a bridge, what you do too. That reminds me of Lemmings. Do you remember that game, Lemmings? But yeah, be careful who you're following. Be careful who you're listening to. Are you listening to your own inner guidance, your navigation system that will tell you when danger is up ahead? Or are you just blindly following someone else who has no idea where they're going? Now, if you feel confident that an educational leader, or a healthcare leader, or a government leader, or a spiritual leader, or whatever, knows what they're talking about. Maybe they don't have it all figured out, because I mean, we're human. Can we possibly know everything? But if at least you can see that they are trying to use that same kind of spiritual discernment, and you yourself are using that spiritual discernment, then you're probably going to have a much safer trip than if just one of you is using spiritual discernment, right? Still, it's better for you to have spiritual discernment first and foremost. But don't let people who don't lead you down the wrong path. Okay. Okay. That's what I got for you tonight. It's verses 31 through 34. It's currently 8:47 Eastern time. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Any questions? Any thoughts?
I just think it goes to show how important our thoughts and beliefs are, and why it's not good to put stock in those who do not believe in us and what we are capable of doing.
Very true. Very true. And that's hard, right?
Oh yeah, especially how we're raised and how important. Well, I guess not everybody's raised that family is super important, but those who are, you grow up wanting them to accept whatever it is that you choose to do.
Yeah.
Although sometimes maybe not.
and we want that kind of affirmation or approval from those who know us well, because we value their opinions. But unfortunately, a lot of times they have no idea what they're doing either.
No. That's the only thing that's kind of switched gears with perspective, is that we're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Every single one of us, from grandparents to our parents to us to our children to cousins and aunts, and every single one of us, if we look at us as an individual and not the title that we're given, it's a lot easier to see the perspective that we're all on our own journey and we all have to forge our own path.
Yeah.
So honestly, it comes down to, I mean, we have God and we have Jesus, but if there's anybody else we need to really listen to, it's ourselves. And have that support from ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and you've seen that in your own work. with
Oh,
emotion
very much
food, you've
so.
seen how the body knows, there's just this innate knowing.
Hmm.
And how many of us actually listen to that? Not many.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that escapism is still there. I know we talked about sober-mindedness, not
Yeah.
just to whether it's alcohol or cigarettes or any of that, but even to like technology or sugar or anything that really separates us from really listening to ourselves and that still inner voice, that small voice to be able to use that discernment.
You're exactly right. It reminds me of this book, The Body Keeps the Score.
That book had me go when this whole fun thing started.
Uh-huh.
Was one that I read, and that's what really made me want to switch gears.
Yeah.
That's huge. That resonated a lot with me.
Very good book.
Yes.
Alicia, do you have any thoughts, questions, anything you'd like to share?
So, I just going back to your family won't see the value in you because they didn't even see it with Jesus. So how are they going to see it with you? So following your gut and trusting yourself when the world, that most people know, because most people, let's say, stay within their family, but they're not going to see your gifts. They just don't see your light.
They don't. Mm-mm. They're too close, I think. It's like when you get too close to a television screen, you can see like individual pictures, individual
Yeah.
pixels, but you can't see the whole big picture. I think it's like that. And if you think about it, how do we know that Christ loved the way that he did? Is it because we heard it or because we had an example of it? You know what I mean? He showed his love for others by the sacrifice that he made, right? I think that it works the same way in a familial situation where if you are, let's say you want to go vegan, okay, because you've heard of whatever health benefits that it may have for you. So you decide, I'm going to go vegan and I'm going to tell all of my family about this. And they all laugh at you and think you're a nutball. But then a few years go by and they see how healthy you are and how strong you are, whatever. So they're like, oh, well, maybe they had a good idea there. I think that, yeah, the China study, exactly. Well, I did see something interesting today, though, that was about the differences between a placenta of a vegetarian and the placenta of a meat eater. That was quite intriguing in terms of like iron, copper, some of those vitamins and minerals that you can only get from animal products, and the difference that the researcher said that the vegetarian placenta looked like a smoker's placenta and compared to the meat eaters placenta. Like they weren't only eating meat, they were eating other healthy things as well. But can you imagine like what some people are eating McDonald's every day and stuff like that, and what their placenta might look like? But anyway, finding something that works for you, you can tell your people till it's blue in the face, till you're blue in the face, till they're blue in the face, till everybody's blue in the face. And ultimately, they're not going to be convinced until they see the results. And usually they have to see the results from somebody else.
And that's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's set in stone, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's why I think that you're supposed to leave the house to find out what you're about.
Mm. And I think too,
as you grow, to find out, because when you have I guess, the security of the box, I call, it's scary to go out. But then if you don't, you'll never find out what you're about. And I guess some people don't have that urge, though.
Well, I think you have to look at it from a slightly different perspective too. If if you are, let's take a real world example for you. Okay. You believe in ASEA. You swear by ASEA. You've seen what it can do, right? And you know a lot about ASEA. So you can share that with others. And it's a tremendous product. I got sold on it because I learned the science from the expert. Now, had I known you previously, I probably would have felt much like most people feel about when their friend introduces them to another MLM. My family didn't want to hear me about essential oils, right? It took someone else to get them interested in it. Now, ASEA, if you go and you tell your family and your friends about it, they're gonna be like, oh, whatever. It's just the thing you're doing. It's no big deal.
Yep.
But if Dr. Gary were to come along and give a presentation and they were a part of that, oh, well, we got to try this right away. Right? How fast would that change?
Yeah.
Now, if you bought them the tickets, if you sent them the video, if you took them to the conference themselves, they'd probably still be less likely to believe it than if they found it on their own. And that's I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like you have to convince the person it was their idea. That's one of the most effective marketing techniques. Is you don't want to actually sell something to someone. You want to give them the story that it intrigues them enough that they have the idea themselves, like, I would like to try this. Right? That is the most effective way to sell something.
Sort of like
Get them to
reverse
have the idea.
psychology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people don't want to be sold. You're right.
Mm-mm. It has to be their idea. If it was their idea, they'll go for it. Think about how many people have tried to evangelize you in the past. Yeah, you grew up, around Catholicism, right? So you weren't naive to the idea. But at least at the time that I met you, you weren't actively involved in any particular church. Is that correct?
Actually, I've been going to church for 30 years, maybe 20,
Okay.
20 years at least.
Okay. Like regularly.
Pretty regularly, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
not as much lately since COVID and stuff in the move.
Yeah.
But yeah, my
Okay.
husband didn't go, but I would take the kids.
And how much does he listen to you about anything involving church?
Um, really don't discuss it with him because he feels like I'm preaching.
See what I mean?
Yeah,
He doesn't want to
yeah,
hear from you. It has to be his
no.
idea.
And he's just had a bad sour taste with religion, and because he was a prison guard. So I guess he just thinks they're all hypocrites. Anyways, that's his own deal.
Yeah. Well,
Uh, I have my own faith, you know.
yeah. And it's something that you have cultivated on your own.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And maybe because I had it maybe dropped in my, maybe the seed was planted, whether it was, from the Catholic Church or just other family members, not everybody was Catholic in my family.
Yeah.
My immediate family, my mom converted, but they were all Baptist
Okay.
from the South. So I guess, yeah, it's always been It's always been a part of my life, whether I went a lot um or a little. I did break away, but after children, that something was missing, and I felt a calling to, get back aligned with people that were
Yeah.
serving others, because that's what churches do. They help people in the community. That's what we're supposed to be doing in the church. And I still love the church that I go to as far as the music.
Mhm.
They have a great music ministry, and they do help a lot of people. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the people in the church, some of them are hypocrites.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you find that everywhere though, not just the church.
Well,
But think
that's
about it.
true.
You said yourself that it was just something inside of you that wanted to get connected with people who were helping people, right?
Well,
That was your idea.
also to worship Jesus and worship God,
Sure.
and to fellowship. I think fellowship is very important.
Yeah.
And I wasn't getting it with my spouse, so I went out looking for it.
Well, at least you went to a church and not to a bar, right?
Well, I worked in one of those, so
So
I
you knew
worked
it
in
was there.
bars and restaurants. Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
let's think back to the early days of your ASEA journey. Were you sold to, or was it your idea? Like someone told you their story, like, oh my gosh, man, this is just amazing stuff. It
So,
works. And
well, the first time I didn't even give her a chance. I had given up on my mom's health.
Mm.
I just knew she had Alzheimer's, and that was going to take her out, and we were just in a mode where we accepted whatever was happening and felt like there was no cure
Yeah.
or even hope. I lost hope.
Mm.
So when it came around the second time, I was like, yeah, the seed was planted.
Mm-hmm.
The seed was planted.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yep. That's, I can think back to my early days with Young Living. I have officially been with Young Living for 67 months now. That's because I really believe in it. But when my friend first told me about it, she was like, hey, I know that you have a lot of issues with fibromyalgia. And I thought, well, maybe that this might be something that could help you. And she wasn't really trying to sell me. I mean, she kind of was, but she kind of wasn't. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And I did. I looked into it, but I wasn't sold on it. I really had to do my own research. I really had to take some time and sit with it for, I don't know, I think it was like 3 or 4 months before I made the decision. And then I finally called her one day. I was like, hey, so tell me more about the oils, but it was my decision. I was the one that came to that. You know what I mean?
And I guess timing, that whole timing thing.
Yeah.
Because
I agree.
sometimes it can happen the first time that you meet somebody.
So I think that does have something to like receptivity, our willingness and our receptiveness to it.
From
Katie, go ahead.
No, that's exactly it. Whether you're in a position where you can accept the gift,
Mhm.
accept the information, accept the vibrations, because
Yeah,
sometimes your own mind might be locked up, and you might not be in a place where it's even feasible to,
yeah.
you know, understand it, or I don't know.
Well, that brings up a really good point. I was watching a video the other day that was talking about exactly that. They're like, what you are in resonance with, whatever you are currently vibrating at, is what's going to be drawn into your awareness. So if you are vibrating at a frequency that is putting out love and friendship and camaraderie, then that's what you're going to attract into your circle. Whereas if you're putting out a frequency of, negativity and doubt and worry and fear, then you're going to attract more negativity and doubt and worry and fear,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I had sent a video to Katie yesterday that was really, really good. It was about a woman who had a near-death experience, that she's referring to that in the chat. And she
And
said
is
that,
that what that was about? I didn't know what that was about.
just for the sake of the folks who'll be watching later, it says she had mentioned about it being God or source speaking through us. So when we connect like that, how would you view that? Larger circuitry for source, when those who help others come together with others who help others. Again, I feel like that falls into that kind of resonance. What are we vibrating at? Are we in a lower state of consciousness? Are we in a state of fear? Then we can expect to obtain more things that would either heighten our fear or would cause more fear, feed into our fears, or kind of see whatever our fears are coming to fruition as a result of us being in that mental space. But then on the flip side of that, if we are operating from a place of love, then we're going to meet others who are loving. I've noticed that, especially with like a growth mindset. When I was in this very low, oh, woe is me, everything's terrible, then I wasn't really attracting anything great into my life. And it just so happened that I was doing some training for Young Living, and they had mentioned this one video that was supposed to be, really great for people who were involved in MLMs. And I watched it, and she was talking about that growth mindset and being willing to think about something positive happening to us instead of something negative all the time. And ever since then, that radically changed my my vibration. It radically changed what I was looking for in life and what I was attracting into my sphere of influence. Here waving at you. And easy. And ever since then, it really has more and more and more and more positive things are coming into my awareness. So pretty awesome. Oh, look, we're just having big old hugs here. See, look, I start talking about love and radiating love, and I get lots of love. You have sweet dreams, okay?
This thing is bothering me.
Oh, so sorry here. Let me get that for you somewhere.
It gets stuck on.
Okay. So anyway, I think that despite these verses all being, slightly different in their literal interpretation, I really think that they are very similar in their allegorical interpretation. What do you ladies think? Miss Katie says sweet dreams.
Adorable.
I know, aren't they?
Oh, just so sweet.
That better? Good? Okay. She had a hangnail. Ugh, they're the worst.
All right, girls.
Good night, sweet peas. Love you. Okay. Yeah, the being a city on a hill, being a light, right? And not being led by people who aren't really doing the work, I think we see a lot of, especially nowadays, we see a lot of virtue signaling, but a lot of people that are talking the talk aren't really walking the walk. And I am not inclined to follow people like that. I had an amazing pastor many years ago. Such a gifted teacher. And I It was like borderline worship for me. Like I really, really valued this pastor because he was such a wealth of knowledge and he was able to articulate the scriptures in such a clear and in-depth kind of way. And then one day I saw him with his congregation, so not all of his congregation, but some of the people from his congregation, myself included, at a party where he got so ridiculously drunk that he could barely stand up. And the way he was behaving during that time was not the way that you would expect a pastor to behave. Now, I know he's human. He's not perfect. None of us are. But if he is talking such an eloquent talk, but then not being able to walk it out, that from my perspective, it was like, well, how the heck am I going to live it out if he can't? You know what I mean? It was very disheartening to see that, because you could tell, even despite the fact that he was very learned, you could tell that he had a heart for what he was teaching too. It wasn't all just, oh, I know all of these things. It was, I love the Lord with all my heart and I really believe in this stuff. But then when push came to shove, he didn't really walk it out. And again, we do have to be willing to give people grace because they are human, but it damaged his witness considerably. And I wasn't so sure that I wanted to be led by someone who couldn't walk it out. You know what I mean? So it's a fine line where if we want someone to be healthy and we tell them that the best way to do that is to eat lots of fruits and vegetables, but then they see us eating McDonald's every day, they're not going to listen to us at all, whether they know us or not. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Yes, integrity. Exactly. I love how Dr. Gary puts that. Integrity is, doing what you say you're going to do. Something that works the way it says it's supposed to work. A bicycle with square wheels isn't going to get you very far, right? But if it's got round wheels and those wheels are properly inflated and you have a seat and you have handlebars and you have some pedals, you're probably going to get to where you need to get to. That's integrity, right? So we have to be very mindful of how we are expressing our own light out in the world. Are we putting it under a basket? Are we hiding it? Are we only saving our piety for church day? Oh, it's Sunday, let's be extra pious today. Right? Like, we do have to operate from a level of integrity. And, to be perfectly honest and transparent with you, one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in maintaining integrity is mindset. I do believe that my thoughts have the power to change my reality, that my words have the power to change my reality. That said, sometimes my thoughts slip back into the mud, and it's no wonder that the universe is so confused. God's confused. He's like, well, I don't know what you want. Do you want to be happy or not? Right? Because I'm creating the frequency that's being transmitted out of my head and out into the ether and receiving back an equivalent frequency. So if I'm going high vibe 1 minute, low vibe the next minute, I'm getting 2 different stations. And Christ tells us about that as well. He talks about how we're not supposed to be double-minded, right? Because it's like a ship tossed on the ocean. It's back and forth. We're not consistent. We're all over the place. But one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with is keeping my mindset at the vibration that I want to maintain. And I'm sure that everyone probably has that issue as well, at least from one time or another. Yeah, you're very right, Katie, that when you do walk the walk, it tends to offend other people. And you can see that. You can even see that in what the scriptures that we read tonight were saying about Christ. They literally were offended by him, right? And they were offended in him. Matthew 13:57, right? It's
Can I
very
add?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the way that I see it is we can have that discernment and hear that small voice, but when we have those negative thoughts that seem to come out of nowhere, if we could hear that still small voice, who's to say who that other voice is then? That's not on the same wavelength, that is not trying or is trying to deter us from the path that we are on.
Well, in Christianity, we call it Satan, and in
Yeah.
everything else, we call it
The
ego.
other wolf.
What's that?
I said the other wolf. Which one
Yeah,
you feed?
exactly. Yeah. I do think that it tends to stem from ego, though. It's at least in my experience, and this could be different for everyone, but personally, that negative voice comes out of a necessity for self-preservation. I am fearful because, and it's always something to do with
Yeah,
my own self-preservation.
I would agree with that. And it always seems to come out of fear. That and that's not a good vibration to be at, although sometimes it really does seem, it makes me think of knowing that the government could send out different frequencies on whatever, really. And it makes me think of the different studies that were done to show that its effect on a public. So perhaps it's that as well.
Well, like you said, it's a radically different set of frequencies operating from a state of love versus the state of fear, right? We've got fear way down here. And then if you look at the events of the past few years, not only did we have fear, but we also had grief. Some people were completely apathetic or ambivalent. There were lots of people who were being guilted and shamed into their choices, right? Very, 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 very low vibration. And what do we already know about things that are low vibration? We know that that's where illness is generated. We see physical illness from a consistent supply of low vibratory energy, low like negative energy, right? And then on the opposite side, we've got love up here, way up here, and peace, joy, enlightenment, all of these things, one kind of stems from another, right? They kind of go up through just naturally and completely counteract that which is down here. Does it mean that this is any more powerful is the question? Because fear is a pretty powerful thing. Shame and guilt, grief, apathy, they're pretty powerful, right? How much more powerful truly is enlightenment, peace, or joy? I think about it in terms of that scale that we've used before with temperature. We've got extreme heat on one side, extreme cold on the other side, and these are varying degrees in the middle. They're still the same, Extreme heat can kill you. Extreme cold can kill you, right? They are both equally powerful, and they counteract one another. You know, they are polar opposites. So how can we maintain our light? I say, one, we should surround ourselves with people who are also bringing the light. Two, I think it's an active process, not a passive process. I do not think you can just sit there and say, well, I don't want to be fearful anymore. I want to be, you know, always in a state of love, and then just expect to have that happen by osmosis. Like, it's a conscious effort to monitor your thoughts. And what do we know about what Christ said about guard your thoughts? Sorry, I've got like a little gnat in here. Proverbs 4:23, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Luke 6:45, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil, for his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. 2 Corinthians 10:3-5. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Philippians 4:6-7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Proverbs 4:25. Let your eyes look directly ahead and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. 2 Corinthians 10:5. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing. Oh, I've already read that one. Sorry. 2 Corinthians 4:4. In whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Ooh. 1 Peter 1:13. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. I can go on and on and on. You get the idea. Guard your mind and your heart. And I feel like it's worth noting here that the heart has this natural gift of knowing. It is the primary resonator in the body. It's like an antenna, and it has a network of cells that are intelligent. This is why we experience things like heartache or extreme joy in the center of our chest. You know, this is why when we are absolutely in love with someone, we feel it. Our heart skips a beat, right? Because it's the resonance in our heart. Our heart is more knowledgeable than we give it credit for, sometimes more than our brains. And we are meant to guard that, because very quickly something that is not good for us can switch that right around. Think about it. You're having a wonderful day. Everything's going your way. Everything's happy and sunshiny and fantastic. And someone with a piss poor mood comes walking in and completely changes the day for you. How often do you continue to go about your day? Now, mind you, I know you guys have done a lot of work up to this point, but let's look back like at you a year ago.
Oh, that's easy peasy. I still have sarcasm that comes out. And I'm like, oh, if you keep looking like that, your face is gonna freeze on. I just throw laughter into it all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Are you always like that?
yes, my family's very sarcastic. Nowadays, though, as soon as I feel that energy shift, I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna walk myself out of this room. It's not even worth the energy.
Yeah.
Before, it was more of a playful nature in regards to their response. But now it's just not worth it.
Well, and I've noticed, and you've probably noticed this too, sometimes when someone is in a terrible mood and you try to use humor or sarcasm, it doesn't really make them any happier.
No, but I will say, when I have seen there's two things in my family. We're like, are you hangry? Do you need a hug? Because those usually solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, the hugs are big. I remember a few months ago, my family and I were all out and about, and Cheyenne was just having a miserable attitude. She was so mean to everyone. And I didn't catch it right away. It wasn't until we got home that evening, and she was just like unbearable. And I looked at her and I could see that she was so overwhelmed with anxiety or anger. I'm not really sure what. She was just so at her breaking point. And I looked at her and I was like, do you need a hug? And she was like, uh-huh. And that was enough. I held her for a while, and she ended up being fine after that, perfectly fine. So sometimes it is just as simple as needing a hug. I know I needed a hug earlier today. I'm thankful for Caleb because he gave me a hug. But
That's awesome. But hugs, it really is. Sometimes, I mean, clearly, as I continue to be spirit led, communication is not always key. And sometimes just that hug does really change everything, because it's not just a hug.
I think that even a hug, though, is communication. It's just communication without words. We're communicating on an energetic level.
Which then goes back into language, not for nothing, where we talked about language perhaps
being a hindrance.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of times, whether somebody is talking and, the mood does matter, hand that to me, please, or through text and language, especially, how misconstrued it could come off.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, heaven's sakes, we're trying to read scriptures that are, over 1,000 years old, almost 2,000 years old. And, do we really have any clear understanding of what they were trying to convey? We can go based on the words on the page, but inflection matters. Context matters. That's why I try not to just read a single verse, even though it's probably just that single verse that would apply in that instant. I try to provide context when I can, because that can radically change the meaning of a verse. And a lot of times, especially like in a text message or something like that, we can't see context. What?
Oh, not at all. I think it's very helpful when you go and even when you're looking for reference of what you're talking about, to go a few verses after the reference or before the reference that you're getting into, because it is helpful. Mm-hmm. It's easy to cherry pick things and just have it say what you want it to say, but it makes paints a whole different picture when you actually read more of the details that are getting painted into the picture.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I think that does it for the study.